I was originally asked to do a program for Study Club in this, and our topic this year was Wisconsin, so I couldn't think what to do, and I found an article in this Badger history about John Horner. And I thought, well, what's better about Ripon than John Horner? And now my mother always told me that little Jack Horner was a relative of the Horners, but I couldn't find that anywhere. But I always think that's neat to think that we are connected with little Jack Horner. So.
I think of him as such a dignified man. Imagine.
Yes. But John Scott Horner was the third son of among 8 children born to Dr. Gustavius Brown Horner and Frances Horner Scott in 1802. He was sent to private boarding school in Virginia. However, his father's death when he was 10 years old interrupted his education. But in 1817, he entered Washington College in Pennsylvania and was graduated 2 years later. He then studied law with the Honorable Thomas L. Moore of Warrenton, Virginia. Horner achieved a wide reputation, especially as an advocate and criminal lawyer. In October of 1834, John Scott Horner married Harriet L. Watson of Washington, D.C. And then in September of 1835, John Scott Horner was appointed as the secretary and acting governor of the Michigan Territory by President Andrew Jackson. Horner was selected because he was, quote, a man after Jackson's own mind. Now, the secretary of the territory acted as the governor in the absence of the governor, so he was a pretty powerful man. And the Michigan Territory had been part of the Northwest Territory, but as eastern parts became populated, they separated into states, including Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. Now, Michigan was getting ready to separate out also and enter statehood. So Horner spent a lot of time in Detroit working with the Michigan group. This wasn't very well liked by the Wisconsin contingents because it was reported that he did not attend meetings on the western side of Lake Michigan. Now, the acting governor did assume leadership in making Michigan a state. However, there were disputes over various boundaries, one with the state of Ohio and one with the Michigan Territory. If you remember from your history, Ohio took a piece of land that Michigan wanted, and then Michigan took Upper Michigan, and Wisconsin lost that. But these disputes, because of all these disputes, the state militia or the territorial militia was kept in readiness because these people were in the frontier. And he kept ready to, that each person had their own area they wanted to defend, and Horner was supposed to keep them all under control. He did persuade the parties to delay action until after statehood, and by doing this, he made the U.S. Congress decide the disputes, and he didn't have to. He realized that the settlers were a very rough and aggressive group, and mob action was often quite volatile in those days. But he was able to avert all these disputes. Now, while this was going on in Michigan, the territory on the west side of the lake was forming a new separate territorial government, and this was the Wisconsin Territory, which included Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, and parts of North and South Dakota. There was to be an election of delegates who would be influential in making many of the next appointments. And in October of 1835, 13 representatives to the Legislative Council were elected, and they decided to meet in Green Bay in January of 1836. However, John Horner, either through ignorance, misunderstanding, or some other reason, changed the date of the meeting and wanted them to meet December 1st of the previous year of 1835 instead of January of 1836. But in those days, since it took so long to get information places, there wasn't time for the delegates to be notified. So 9 of the delegates decided not to meet on the date that Horner wanted to, but just to wait and meet in January, which is what they did. And Horner never showed up for either meeting. So there was a little discrepancy here. I don't know. The members went ahead, these 9 members went ahead, they elected the officers, they appointed committees, they discussed mutual problems, they had a fiscal agent, and prepared reports. They also notified Congress detailing their grievances, and they elected a president of the council. There was a resolution adopted which condemned Horner for various acts of negligence and asked for his recall. Now, in a letter to the Green Bay newspaper, Horner explained at some length the necessity for remaining in Detroit and missing the meeting. In my literature, I never found out what the explanation was. But George Walker, one of the delegates who didn't go to the January meeting, wrote in a Chicago paper that he knew Horner had intended to get to the meeting. In fact, he was planning to meet with Horner either in Chicago or Milwaukee, and they were going to travel together. Walker later learned that Horner had been ill and thus prevented his attendance. And George Walker further commented that if he'd been at the January meeting, he might have been persuaded, too, to sign this recall order. But he just wanted to clear Horner's name, that he'd really been sick. President Jackson, though, did not recall John Horner. But early in 1836, Horner settled near Cassville or Mineral Point. There's a little discrepancy. Possibly in the hope that the Wisconsin territorial capital would be there. Horner had invested in properties over there, so he had an interest. Now, he also at one point had been asked to take up residence near the Mississippi where there were hostile Indians. Horner decided to have a council with the Indians and figure out what the problems were, and the Indians said that the United States were not giving him the annuities that they were supposed to, and they were also starving. Well, Horner got food from Fort Winnebago at Portage, and thus, because of his intervention, diverted an Indian war. But he'd not endeared himself to certain people, and there were lots of discrepancies or arguments back and forth, I guess, but there was never a case found that Horner took advantage of people because of his position or his knowledge, and that he'd done nothing illegal. In fact, the evidence was really to the contrary, that he was really an advocate for the poor and the misfortunate, and that anybody in trouble who appealed to him usually got help from him. In 1837, Horner was transferred as the secretary of the territorial government of Wisconsin to that of the Registrar of Deeds in the Green Bay Land Office. And the man who'd been registrar was then made the secretary, so they sort of flopped places. In the spring of 1937, Horner moved from Mineral Point to Green Bay, and he also resumed his law practice then. His practice was most lucrative, and he also purchased agricultural lands west of Fond du Lac. These were choice pieces of property in Fond du Lac and Marquette counties that he bought in 1838. Now, Horner's appointment as the registrar of the Green Bay Land Office by President Jackson was renewed by Van Buren and Taylor, and he held this office for 11 years. And initially, this job was very laborious and was really profitless, but he'd worked it into a great value, a real prize appointment, and really ripe for political scheming, they said. During his administration, the rights and the interests of the settlers were secured and protected from the land speculators, and Horner was always on the side of the poor man. Since the position as registrar had become such a value, he had many enemies, and some of these enemies convinced President Polk that he was an enemy of the administration and politically disorganized. And while Jackson would have seen through these accusations, President Polk was much more easily influenced, and so he removed Horner from his appointment. Horner was encouraged to return to Virginia and Washington, D.C., but he decided he would not seek public office, and he felt his pride prevented him from returning since he was a comparatively poor man, and he had very rich relatives in the East. So in 1847, he moved to Westwood, which was the Horner farm on the south side of Green Lake near Sandstone Bluff. He was elected the probate judge of Marquette County in 1849, a position that he held until 1854 when it was dissolved. Now, the land that he bought in Fond du Lac County in 1838 included the part which is now present-day Ripon, the northwest part from Oshkosh Street to Hamburg and Washington Street south to Blossom and to the Gothic Mill Pond. Thus, John Scott Horner was one of the original proprietors and co-founder of Ripon, even though David Mapes, in his book, The History of Ripon and its Founder, takes the sole credit. In truth, it seems that Mapes and Horner together agreed to find the city. Horner provided the land and retained the right to name the city and the principal streets, while Mapes acted as a promoter and received various lots for his service, and Mapes was a very vigorous promoter. In 1849, land was purchased from Horner by Mapes with the condition that within a year Mapes build a grist mill, a public house, and run it for a year. And also he got the water power and every other lot. Now Mapes gave away a lot of the land to induce the settlers to come and set up business, to enter a trade, or to farm. But when there were a dozen dwellings, it was decided that a college was in order to draw a class of people that would take pride in their children's education. So David Mapes and John Horner were among the founders of what was to become Ripon College, and that was in 1851. Now John Horner had requested the privilege of naming the city, but there were 4 stipulations. It was not to be a personal name. It was not to be the same name as any other city in the United States. It was not to be an Indian name, and it was to be short. So John picked the name of his ancestral home in England, Ripon. Now they didn't say about pronunciation. We still have trouble. Some people still have trouble pronouncing it. Many of the streets of Ripon bear Horner's influence. Watson, Blackburn, Jefferson, Houston, Washington, Spalding, Cass, and Scott. And in 1850, John Scott Horner built a residence for himself on Scott Street. In the 1880s, John Horner gave what was the first public access road to any lake in the Midwest when he donated the tract of land on the south shore of Green Lake known as Horner's Landing at the end of Horner Road. And Horner's Landing is still used summer and winter to get onto Green Lake. John Scott Horner's last years were spent in Ripon and Green Lake, where he died February 3rd, 1883. And even though Horner was not a native of Wisconsin, he influenced the formation of not only Michigan and Wisconsin, but also Ripon and Green Lake. And he was, to quote from Pedrick's history, one of the brave men who pushed their way into the western wilds and molded out of the chaotic struggle of pioneer life, civilization, society, and government. So that's what I have on.
Wow.
Now you may have lots of other things.
No, but I certainly would like to open up the meeting to anybody's reminiscence.
Yes.
And, questions to you. Was Green Lake where he had his house in Marquette County? Because you said he was.
Well, he said he was. I wondered if Green Lake County hadn't formed, and if Marquette County was part of Green Lake County then.
Marquette County included
Green Lake County, because that would be, I think, Green Lake County on the south side of Green Lake. I mean, would be, because it's both counties are very small. You know, they're like,
No idea when the two were split, but.
must have been after he was
Fairly early.
after he was that, because.
I don't know whether what county seat it. Marquette.
Maybe so. Yeah, why they split, I don't know.
Well,
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, we're fairly interested because I'm Larry Smerling and we now own this.
Oh, okay. Well, you can probably tell us about the house.
And we are not descendants of John Scott Horner, but we are highly interested in history, and if we were very wealthy, the house would be in a much better restoration than it is. I'm sure we're not Riponites. We were born and raised I was in the Oshkosh area and my wife in the Wittenberg area. The house, as many of you are aware, and I think half the people of Ripon considered buying the house at one time because they all went through it. But when we got the house, you might be interested in how we got interested. I was heavily involved in the Winnebago County Historical Society, and one of the Morgan's original houses from Morgan Doors. The Historical Society, through a long story, came in possession, and for a while they were in danger of losing it, giving it up, back and forth, and basically I was the manager and kind of keeping the house together with the support of some other people. We got a new roof put on it, which was very necessary. And once they had invested $35,000 in the roof, they decided, well, maybe we should keep the house. And they've done, if you've seen the house, it's on near the City Hall, and they're doing a marvelous job of restoring it and getting it painted and everything. But anyway, to make a long story short, through the Historical Society, we had a banquet at the Ripon House, or the Republican House? Ripon House. And there was a marvelous lady there that owned it prior to being sold to the Chinese family. And she knew we were all historically interested and got up after our banquet and said, it's just a shame that this historical house had been sitting empty for 3 years. Well, talk about piquing curiosity. After the dinner, we had to go and look at it, my wife and myself, and that was a mistake. Because we saw this forlorn, beautiful house. My wife was always, someday she, in childhood, dreamt that she would be in this big old house someday. And we were peering through the windows, trying the doors, and it was obviously very, very vacant, even though the lawn was cut. And we just, we went home, and nothing else occupied our mind. And we had to go see it, and we contacted the realtor, and we literally spent hours walking through the house. And what really amazed us was the lack of change. I mean, yes, it had been, hot water heat had been put in, the bathrooms had been put in, a couple ceilings had been dropped, but the original stairwell was there, the original floors were there. And actually, like in the great room, there's a room in the house that's 36 by 16 feet. They stripped the paint far enough to put a rug down. And you lifted the rug up and the paint was all still there, probably from the 1800s. It's just a marvelous house, and everybody turned it down. The kitchen's too small, because what they didn't realize is the kitchen of the house is actually the summer kitchen. And the kitchen, the real kitchen, was actually down in the basement, which was under what was the den. In fact, the cooking arm and the fireplace is still there. And it was relatively a large room. But the kitchen itself that became the kitchen was like I think it's 11 by 15, and I might be stretching it. It's a very, very small room. That was one thing. And the other thing, people looked at the house and they said, my God, the heating bills have got to be atrocious. And they were really quite correct in that assessment. I think when we first moved in, our heating bills exceeded our mortgage payments for many years, which was not a pleasant feeling. And like I said, we are not wealthy people. We are very interested in history. And it kind of amuses me, and I don't want to take anything away. It was really an excellent presentation, because you have some information we did not have, but bits and pieces. But we have heard, like Mapes founded Ripon, and then when you really read the history, I think Mapes was more of like a really promoter, and I think if there was really a founder of Ripon, I think it was John Scott Horner. He had the foresight that the land was valuable. Mapes was really a promoter. I don't think John Scott Horner, I think he was too honest, from what I read. There are things in the Territory Register, when this flip-flop occurred, actually the flip-flop was without John Scott Horner's knowledge. Somebody said that he agreed to this, which he did not. And once a flip-flop was created, you got to realize that back in those days, the Register of Deeds of the Land Deed Office was a very powerful office. But he still did not like it, that he, without his knowledge, got, maybe if they had talked to him and said, look, the writing's on the wall, you take this or you're out, he might have agreed and been happy. But there's actually letters where he tried to set the record straight, where he petitioned the president and things like this. So it's really interesting. One of the things, well, needless to say, after spending many, many hours in the house, we just had to buy it. And we later understood, I don't really know the man too well, but Russell Trout, who's in insurance, inherited the house, was relatively difficult to deal with, which I think was part of the problem in the house sale. But we finally, I think he knew we really wanted the house, and I think finally we were saying, well, it needs all this repair, and we were offering this, and he wanted that. And finally I said, look, I understand, people have had problems, blah, blah, blah. What's your bottom line? tell us, if we can do it, we'll do it. If we can't, we'll just walk away. He told us the bottom line, and fortunately, he was not unreasonable, and we ended up with a house. And we really enjoy the house, other than the fact that I look at it and I look at the amount of maintenance and stuff, and then we're not keeping up, and there's a lot of reasons behind that, and it's not because we intend to neglect it. We are going to get to many things. We've been doing a lot of things internally to try to improve things. But one of the things, going back, when we were at this dinner at the Republican House, they had all these pictures around the wall, Mapes and John Scott Horner. And how many, has everyone seen that picture? Do you know what I'm talking about? They're big portraits. Relatively large portraits. And John Scott Horner, if you look at that portrait, is relatively spooky. You'd almost look at it and say, this is a deranged man. Well, I don't know who that is up on the wall, but it is not John Scott Horner. Because Tony, and I really have to apologize, that's a very early picture. We have a later one that I'm going to show. But if you look at that picture and you look at the picture.
Hold it up again.
We'll hold that up against an actual photograph of him as an older. But
Where did you get your photographs? Did you find them in the house?
No, there are two antique dealers in town, and I remember Tony, and I'm racking my brain. They live in that Civil War looking house on, what is that?
Jim Cottrell, or Jim Cottrell.
Yeah.
No, it's Tony, I don't think it's Jim.
Oh, Tony is up on
Is that-
Hamburg and Oshkosh.
The corner.
Yeah, the old
Yes,
rectory.
yes.
Yeah, there's Tony and there's another individual.
Brian.
Brian, thank you. Because they really need some really nice credit. One evening, we just happened to knock on their door because somebody had told us that they had an original bed, from the house, and some other furniture that they had sold to an antique dealer, and we bought it, and the antique dealer said it had come from Brian and Tony. So we were curious, and we talked to Brian and Tony, and they said, yes, the bed was from the house, it was original, but it was kind of like a butler's dresser, where it pulls out and there's like a desk, and then but it looks like a bedroom piece. He said that was from Ripon, from an old house, but it was not from the Horner house. Well, we were kind of upset and excited and blah, blah, blah. But they sat down and talked to us, and then they later contacted us, and they said, well, because you own the house and because you're interested, they gave us some original land deeds that John Scott Horner wrote in his original hand. I mean, they didn't sell it to, they're antique dealers. They didn't sell it to us, they gave it to us. They gave us the original glass negative of John Scott Horner in his later years. My brother, as a present, had the negative blown up into a picture, and I'm going to show it. They also gave us a friend of ours who was an antique dealer, Jim Peterson, he's in Berlin, he's originally from Oshkosh. He gave us a picture of Gustav Horner's family in the original frame. We also have, I think it's Mrs. Horner as a baby, or a younger girl, that was given to us. And we also have the Watson, which is John Scott Horner's wife's maiden name. Watson, there's things that make us cry because much of the furniture was still in the house up until the time that Ann Calden died. Ann Calden was like the great-granddaughter of John Scott Horner. There were things like President Jackson presented John Scott Horner with a engraved head cane. That went at the auction. There was Watson's, Mrs. Watson's father or uncle was either I forget, a colonel or like a high-ranking officer in the War of 1812. The original sword was in the house. That got sold at auction. I mean, it was just a kind of incredible. And we saw John Scott Horner's a sofa from the house down in Mount Orb, And it was labeled from John, and we were really tempted to get it, but it was priced about 3 times what an antique sofa. And we just, again, I mean, we're interested in getting things back in the house, and if we ever give the house up or give it to the Historical Society or whatever we're gonna do with it, we would stipulate that any items that were Horner that come back to the house would have to stay with the house. And we would never, the house, I don't know if people realize it, the church across the street at one point in time wanted to tear the house down and build a parking lot. It came very close. At one point it became very close to being a daycare. So I'm sure everybody's had their ideas and things like that. So it's a marvelous piece of history. I don't think a lot of people realize that the Horner house sat on originally 8 acres of land. All those lots going around the house were actually part of the house. I don't think I brought it tonight, but we have a postcard. They had their own ice house. If we ever build a gazebo in the yard, it's going to be a replica of the ice house, which will probably never happen, but you know, you got to dream. And many of you are probably aware that on the opposite street, which is Jackson, that stone house there is actually the stables from the house. I'm sure many of you are aware of that. We came very close to buying that, but they came to sale shortly after we bought the house, and we couldn't swing it. But we really looked at it. I went through the house, and if I had had a little bit more money, the 2 properties would have been together. So it's an interesting.
Are you going to share your pictures?
My leg went to sleep.
That's why I don't limp. I just.
It sounds like the powers that be just sort of directed your path to the purchase of that house.
There's kind of some strange things. We bought the house in 1990, and we moved in the day of closing. A lot of people didn't think we'd be there until a week later. And there's you know, maybe on another time there's a couple of things that happened that were kind of funny. But one of the times I was fixing a light fixture in the bathroom because it was an old fixture and we needed more light, and I was just doing something temporary to get more light. And I was in the wall, and I pulled out this newspaper, and it was all crumpled up. And I looked at it, and I saw the date, August 5th. Wow, that's kind of cute. That's my birthday. I opened it up, and it was the year I was born. And that's kind of weird. And then after that, I was talking to my sister-in-law. They bought a house in Oshkosh, and she was out under the porch cleaning up, and there was an old shoppergram rolled up, and she's a curious nature. She unrolled it, and it was my brother's birthday, the year he was born. I mean, you talk about weird coincidences. This is, it isn't in the best shape in the world, but this is the William Watson, who I believe was Mrs. Watson's dad. Historic illustrations of the Bible. I guess you wouldn't really call it the family Bible, but it's, you know, part of what is part of history. I don't, you know, I feel like I'm
Oh,
kind of.
no, that's, no,
You're encouraged
no.
to share anything anybody
That's
knows.
wonderful. I just was
George,
jumping off point.
You're George?
Yeah.
We've been meaning to talk to you for 8 years. So,
We've been wondering who lived in the house. I think it was Bruce who told us, Bruce Schwimmer who told us that you were.
yeah, Bruce has tried to talk me into joining the Historical
Yeah.
Society, and we probably would, but I think you usually meet at times that kind of conflict.
Oh, but you can belong. We'd be happy to have you. It doesn't cost much money.
No, it
And then
doesn't.
you'd get our newsletter and you could come, well, you can come anyway. We
Well-
would welcome you whether you belong or not, but we'd like you to belong.
You think the land deeds are relatively elaborate, but they're really not.
Oh, my.
Yeah. I mean, and there's some that look a little bit more official.
Will you say your name again, please, so I can get it written down?
My name is Larry Smirling.
Smirling.
Here's your purse.
S-M-E-R-L-I-N-G.
Here's your,
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know if you want to pass it around and look at it. I mean, it's
Larry, do you know Bev King?
yes.
Okay, so you talked with her?
She tried to get us to put the house on tour,
Yes.
and it's just not, it's not to the condition where it's ready for that. Yeah, Bev has
Because
a number of times twisted my arm. And, you know, not that we wouldn't love to have people look at it, but at the same time,
She's the one who got the house on the National Register.
was she?
Yep.
See, I wasn't even aware of that. This is something that people might want to look at. These are related to Horner, but there are pictures in here that we don't know if they're like relatives. They're not all of the John Scott Horner house. We think some of them might be the Green Lake Farm, but there's just like no way of knowing.
Nancy, what was
He
Here's-
wasn't a relative. I'm not related to the Horners.
Oh, you are?
No. No, I'm really, no.
You might want to pass, this is the original ice house, and if you look, the Horner house is off. This is a postcard that was made. So you might, people might be interested in looking at.
How
Do
did
you
you
still-
acquire this, the album, the picture?
It was given to us by Bruce and Brian,
Those
Tony
are the
and
things
Brian.
they gave to you, didn't
Yeah.
sell to you, they gave.
Yeah, and then the other things, like I said, the negative, which I did not, of course did not bring,
Yeah.
they gave us that. I believe this book was given to us by Jim Peterson, and the portrait, actually it's a wedding present, it's in the original frame. I mean, how many times do you get a picture in the original frame that somebody said, well, let's get rid of this picture, we'll put it in a box and we'll use the frame. So the frame gets sold separately, and then the picture, if it survives, gets sold another time. This is the original picture in the original frame, which is kind of
Do
unusual.
you know, we have a portrait in very poor condition, maybe not even a good one, we don't know because it's so grimy, that Ann's daughter gave us when she was clearing it. It's the only thing she gave us.
Okay, this is the Horner house when it still had a double-decker porch,
Okay.
when we hope to put on there someday.
Are there any living relatives?
Ann's daughter's still alive, and France Thomas is, well, she died, a year or so ago, and her daughter's still alive. And I don't, one's in Canada. Yeah, no, well, yeah, one in the nursing home died, but her daughter's still
Where did she
alive.
live?
I get mixed up. One lived in Canada, and one lived
That's Ann's.
Andy, and Grace M. I'm not sure where. One's Grace M. and one's Andy. Okay, but so there were two grandchildren. I think that's the only grandchildren there were of those three daughters, of the three girls.
So if anyone's interested and anyone has seen these portraits, these pictures before, we would love information on it. I'll just leave it up here.
Let's see the picture.
Bev King wasn't able to identify anything for you, or?
I don't think she has ever seen this stuff.
Okay.
How many of us here toured the house when Ann Paulson was living there?
I did, well, I visited her.
Sure.
I visited.
Sure. Was
Yes.
there, yeah.
As dear as Ann must have been, it's a good thing she didn't burn the place down because
Yeah.
there are
Amazing.
numerous burns on the floor, and old houses, once they get, I don't know if any of you know it, last winter we actually had a fire in the house. What had happened was, we believe that when the house was originally built, there was a settle, where the chimney was, there was too much weight and the house actually settled. Because probably in the 1800s, there's repairs that would indicate rather than redo it, they just adjusted for the settling. So there's a door frame that's at this angle. Well, when that settling occurred, unbeknownst to anybody because it was behind walls, there was a crack at the fireplace. Next to that crack was a 2x6. And over the years, many, many times that had gotten to charred. They can tell when something burns and when something gets near flash point, dies out, restarts, dies out. This 2x6, which was an original 2x6, not the little thin ones you get nowadays, but a full one, was about this thick.
In other words, it had been charred many, many times.
Yeah, it hit the flash point because we had a fire going and it was very hot. We had a hot fire going. And a lot of times when we first moved in the house, before we understood fireplaces, we would start a fire without getting a good draft going and you get smoke back. Well, we rarely had that, but we were getting smoke that day. So I went up in the attic, I went in the basement, and this was at probably 7 o'clock in the evening. It was dark, it was winter. and I was going into the kitchen to put a fan in there to open the door and exhaust it. And I don't know what, but something said there's something wrong when I walked through the room. So I turned on the light and I looked at the dining room wall, and there was a brown streak about 2 feet wide, about 8 feet high. And that got my immediate attention. And then I went up to it and I could see embers through plaster, you know, a horsehair plaster. And my initial thing was chop a hole in it and throw water on it. Well, then my brain kicked in and it says, when you open up a fire, I mean, you open up an area that the thing flashes out. Well, we said no, so we dumped water in the fireplace. My wife called 911, and I have to say I gained a new respect for Ripon Fire Department. I could not believe within a minute and a half, there were like trucks, hook and ladders, emergency vehicles. I mean, they were just, well, we're not that far away, but it was there like instantaneous. They made sure we were out of the house. They looked at the problem. They put it immediately under control. They made hardly any mess at all. If it wouldn't have been for the fire damage, you wouldn't have seen anything. Well, the only thing that happened was they chopped into the wall to get to the fire, and it damaged the wallpaper, which is 1960s, and then it has to come off anyway. There are a couple cracks that were there that widened, but I mean, there was no damage to the floor. The house, even though it was built in the 1850s or whenever, there was a fire stop built in because of the type of house. It was not a wood house. They used to build wood houses, if you're familiar with historical houses. There used to be nothing to stop a fire once it got started. Well, because this is a stone house, and you can't just stop a floor anywhere, it had to be anchored into the stone. So what do? You run it across even areas that don't show to get it anchored. That created a fire stop. The total floor was charred underneath. They did go into a closet and they cut out the floor, but you know, that's relatively minor. When we consider that if we had had this fire and we had gone away, we might have come back to a pile of limestone. So we haven't fully. We're probably no longer going. We love having the fireplace, but we're probably no longer going to burn wood because we're afraid that in another part of the house there might be a concealed area that's going to start. So what we're going to do is install a gas fireplace. We're going to leave the fireplace and everything there. It'll just be installed. If anyone ever wanted to go back, they could spend the $40,000 and do it. This is Lillian Corl. I don't know if you say that, Corliss Horner, married to Gustav Braun Horner. And this is like 1 year old.
Well, Gustav Brown must be Gus.
Now, that was
In
his
other words,
father.
Ann's father.
And this is an original, this note's on the back, and I have no reason to doubt it. Original frame, tintype from the Horner family home in Ripon, 1987. Tintype in the back, unknown. Alice Bailu, John Bailu. In the front,
B-E-W,
B-E-L-O-U.
Oh,
Anna Bailu Horner.
don't
So
we say
she-
Bilo?
Bilo? Is it Bilo? Well, she married apparently Gustav. So I would assume those were relatives in the back
Yes, I
of
don't have
hers.
the genealogy of it.
She was a grandmother of Ann Horner Calden of Ripon.
Oh,
The Bailu family was from New York State. Anna Bailu married the son of Governor Horner, Territory Governor, Michigan Territory, one of the co-founders of Ripon. So this
That was
is
a granddaughter then?
relatives of Gustav's wife and Gustav and Anna Horner, who through, I don't know if you know this, but from what we understand, the only time the house has been out of the Horner family, with the exception of us, was that Gustav Horner was in partnership with some, I'm not quite sure who, but for some reason, his partner ended up with the house. And then Ann Horner, bought the house from this partner of Gustav. So I mean,
Did you know that?
and that's one of the reasons why it kind of, like the furniture, a lot of the furniture stayed in there. But then we heard another story that Ann Calden's sister dealt a lot with antiques, and even though there were old things in the house, they weren't necessarily all original.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, we listen to things and we try to put things together, and I would love to get a photocopy of your notes.
Oh, I'd be glad to do that.
And then,
That'd be exciting.
I'm kind of saving it to last. I think for his time, he was kind of a, what you call a handsome, roguish guy. And if you remember the picture in the Republican House,
Yes.
much different looking individual. And my brother bought an antique frame, and I see there's dust on it. And this is from the original glass negative. And for a glass negative, this is, I would guesstimate, probably close to the end of his life. You know, he definitely was older. I think he died in 1873.
Yeah, 1883.
1883. So I'm sure this was probably like 1870s, 1880s in that era. So, I mean, for that glass negative to survive is just amazing.
Where is he buried?
He's buried in right by the Ripon College,
Okay, cemetery.
and it's very near the front. When we first moved to Ripon, one of the first crusades we were going to start, they're like they're like marble crosses, and they're quite large. They're about this high, about this wide. One was broken.
Right, they're on the ground.
Yeah, and we were just, you know, we were getting a house and all this type of thing, and we were gonna make this crusade to get somebody to fix this. And lo and behold, the next time we went there, a couple of years later, because we're not relatives, so we didn't visit it every, month or something, it was repaired, and I don't know who did it, but we were just like kind of amazed. Maybe just the cemetery took care of it. We just thought the co-founder of Ripon, and the headstone is broken, it's laying there. And there are some other people, I don't recall right now, but there's some daughters or something, I think, that are buried there. They might have died
Probably.
relatively early. And I think there might be like a sister buried there or something. So there's more than like 2 Horners buried there. But John and his wife are buried there, and there are, I believe, a couple other, at least, people buried in that area. So.
I don't remember where Ann was buried, do you?
George, do we have records?
I don't remember.
Are there
I'm trying to remember. And
records
Francis
of,
and-
cemeteries?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
The city keeps it.
Okay.
It's owned by the city now.
Right, sometimes, cemeteries are so old that those records have been lost.
This picture was taken at the Lockwood Studios in 1880,
Yeah.
and Deb wrote so much in her book
Yeah.
about Mrs. Lockwood.
Right.
I mean, when you look at, if you think of your own grandparents and how much has really come down, some people might have a lot, but the typical thing is, I think almost nothing survives. Maybe if they had a couple of nice heirlooms, that might, but just think of the number of pictures and artifacts and furnitures and everything that has disappeared. If anybody ever gets a line on anything that's Horner for sale, we are interested in putting it back in the house, but, like I said, we're not wealthy, and we're not gonna pay an arm and a leg for something, but we.
It was a terrible auction. I went to it and I left. I couldn't face it. It was just everything. The daughter had left before the auction.
Well, my understanding is that the mother and daughter did not get along that well. Now, I don't know if that's true
I
or
don't
not.
know whether that's true.
I remember when we moved in, it was kind of funny, the lot is like square,
Did you see this, Moses?
but there's like a little 30 by 30 foot parcel that somehow got redeemed. And the neighbors, well, I think he might have taught at the college or something. He lived in one house and he owned the next house as a rental. And he always wanted that 30 by 30 so he could do something with his driveway or something. And, Ann never would sell it to him, but when she died, I guess she stipulated that he could have it just for the cost of surveying it off and everything. And we didn't realize that that had been surveyed off because no one really told us that. And there were a couple of sculptures by his daughter. Well, there was kind of like a rounded flower bed. And we just took these old sculptures that we figured nobody wanted, and we just stuck one in the middle of, well, that was the wrong thing to do because our neighbor just went through the roof and, There was one that was rusted that he didn't want, but this one apparently he really liked, we could have cared less. So I said, well, I'm sorry, but I says, I just thought I just put it there because it was, it was either that or throw it in the dump. And he got all, well, later when he redid his driveway, he actually installed this out in his driveway. But I mean, some of it, typically totally unintentional. But you look at things and you hear stories. Like there are a lot of tulips and a lot of flowers. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that. Well, apparently there used to be a gardener, and when the gardener ceased to be, he, when the yard kind of went to pot, he knew where the good tulips were. So you have this row of tulips, and all of a sudden there's this big gap, and then the row starts up again, and there's like a little depression. So somebody said, well, when the gardener stopped tending the tulips, they went with him. So I don't know if it's true or not, but it certainly, fits the evidence. But yeah, I mean,
Have you seen all of these?
it's amazing.
We
Like
could have copies of
the
them.
flower beds are overgrown to the point where there's black walnut trees growing that size in the flower bed. I hate to cut down a black walnut tree, but you can't have a black walnut tree in the middle of the flower bed. Another interesting thing that happened is the big black walnut tree in the front yard. I don't know if you've noticed that. About, I would say, at least 50 years ago, they got hit by lightning. And it had healed so that there were two things probably about the size of my legs, if you think of them together, going from the base of the tree, probably about 40 feet in the air, that had
Grown
cured
back
over
together.
this heel where the lightning struck. It struck the tree and came down. Well, they say lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. Well, I'll tell you that's not true. Because lightning struck that tree again, and it actually blew those two heel parts out of the tree. We thought, oh, we're going to lose the tree, and we might lose it. I don't know. We won't plant a black walnut if we do. But we thought that was the worst of it. And then one day I walked out in the yard, and I said, something's wrong. Something's different. And this was after a windstorm, and I was out picking up branches, which you always do after a windstorm. And finally I realized that the wind had actually twisted the tree. The branch that faced the street now had moved 45 degrees. So the tree actually twisted on its axis and did not break. So that's got to be one tough old tree. There is now a split that runs, and you're welcome to come in the yard and take a look at it. There's a split that runs, it's about this wide. It runs from the base of the tree, probably well up into the heavy part of the tree. And if you look up, you can actually see where the lightning struck and came down the tree. And I remember that when it hit, I don't remember the lightning. I saw the flash, but I heard the sound. And the only way I can describe it, it sounded like somebody dumped Hoover Dam in your front yard. It just was it shook the whole house. And this is a limestone house. I mean, the house literally rattled like a wood timber house. It was just such a crash. So it was kind of interesting.
Mary, going back to the furniture, you have a couple pieces that
Yeah.
are original?
The only thing we have is it's a walnut bed. It looks somewhat like what do they call those, a sleigh bed, but it's not really. It's very low slung. I would say it probably was a juvenile bed, but I'm not really sure. We actually have a spot for it. If we ever get that part of the house done, we're going to use it. And I personally believe that the summer kitchen and the maid's quarters, which is, when you look at the house, it's that part that's, yeah, I don't think that was originally on the house for a number of reasons. There's no basement under it. When the house meets the main house, there's like a doorway, but the wall that would be the wall that connects to the house is not a wall like a house wall. It is like an exterior wall. It is solid limestone with a doorway in it. And I think that would be pretty unusual that they would build limestone wall interior. I think the summer kitchen was put on very early, but I really, and it's different size in the house. And I can't prove it unless somebody can, maybe maybe an expert on old houses can come in and say, well, look, this is, but lacking the foundation, you find things out through, you know, if you pay attention to details. They always say you go into an old house and you look, and there's still the electrical spools when they, you know, there are spots in the house with that in there, and you know how many times has that been upgraded. I was in doing something underneath the kitchen, which was a summer kitchen. I was underneath there and looking, and I never could understand the connection between what we use as the dining room and the kitchen. Was, you know, it just did not make sense until I got under there, and the original floor was partly under there, and it was 2 feet lower than the kitchen, because originally you had to step up into the dining room. Now, that floor hadn't been there, and it had all been removed, and then I looked, and sure enough, the back door out of the kitchen, it was stoned in differently, and they had raised the door. They kept the original door, they just raised it. They must have knocked out some stone, and up it went. Because the door, if you look at the door, it is definitely like 1850s or earlier. When we bought the house, everyone claimed it was 1870s, and Jim, Peterson, who was very knowledgeable on antiques and architecture and that type of thing, he walked in the door and he looked at the stairwell and he says, there's no way this could be an 1870s house or 1880s, because another thing that happened, this house has pine floors. And the reason it has pine floors is it wasn't until about 1870s, 1880s where they could manufacture hardwood floors, where it actually became a milling process. And that's one of the clues. You know, the hardwood floors, it isn't because, you know, if you have an 1850s house and then it has pine floors, it's not because they were poor. It's because that was the best that was
And then they
available.
carpeted them.
Right.
Not wall to wall, but they had carpets on
Yeah,
them.
or they just were painted. A lot of times
Yes,
they're
but
just
then they
painted.
usually put carpets, not upstairs maybe, but downstairs.
So there's one of the things about the house, which I really, if you look at the house, have you all seen that there's like I think it's like, I don't know, 1870s or something, it's kind of like a drawing of Ripon. It's got like
Bird's eye view.
bird's eye view. If you look at that picture, you can see the carriage house and you can see the Horner yard. Okay, but look at the house. And one of the curious things is, if you look at the house, it has a cupola.
They want to eat phosphorus.
And if you look at, you know, the house now, it doesn't have it. We've looked for evidence that it was there, and my brother looked at it and he says it was not a full structural cupola, because he says the weight support isn't there. He says if this is the original roof and it wasn't replaced, then the cupola, if it was there, it was, you know,
Just
like
ornamental on
more
the outside.
ornamental than anything. And over time, it might have deteriorated, and somebody just removed it and roughed over it. Type of thing.
We'll have to look at our picture. Anyone else have anything to contribute to the?
I didn't mean to
Oh,
jump,
no,
I still
wonderful.
feel kind of guilty,
Oh,
but
no, that's
You're
great.
adding to our
No,
knowledge.
that's all
And
right. I didn't
you
know anything about the
I
house, so
don't think
that's
you're
good.
talking about the same person, if this person wanted your house in the tour. Bev King doesn't live in Ripon now, but she is the one, she is a member of the historical.
no, what I was saying is, when people find out the house we own, they say,
Yes.
oh, I went through that house, like Bruce from the,
Yes,
Bruce said he looked at the house. I mean,
Yes.
a lot of people that we talk to, you know, like if
Yes.
somebody came up and we get to talking, oh, I looked at your house, I thought, you know, I just thought, well, half of Ripon must have looked at this house too. It's just, who knows? But there's a lot of, you know, I guess the thing that I wish I had was unlimited funds, and just kind of, because we fully intend to, when they repaired the limestone, the way they did it is they took a cement wash and went over it. Well, the nice thing is that it preserves it, but the bad thing is you lose, the house should be all, like, you should be able to see the limestone with the things in between. And I've been doing some research about redoing it.
and you know the state is a resource to you.
Well, the state is a resource in the sense that you can get a tax credit. That's fine, but when you start, you know, when when I go in to change a light switch or something, we had some problems. One of the things that was interesting in this auction was that they did not remove all these light fixtures. I mean, they're not original, but these are old light fixtures, and some of them are worth like $400 or $500, I'm sure, a piece. I was just amazed that they left them. Some of them are converted gas fixtures, some of them are converted kerosene fixture, which is nice. I mean, they're not original, but it's nice to have something that obviously was in the house for a long period of time. But I went to rewire, because it's probably 1920 wiring, the upstairs 2 light fixtures. They were working. Something happened, so I went to rewire them, and you would not believe the problems. I mean, I've been working at it for 6 months, and I don't want to start ripping the house apart to get at them. And I was digging down through this insulation, and I found wire and spool, and I thought maybe I had come to the solution. And as I dug away, there was like a 6-foot length of wire that was connected to nothing. It was just left over. I said, well, that's not the problem, but there's definitely some problem. But every time you think you're going to do something, my wife was in the part over the kitchen. She was going to go up and paint it. And I kind of rolled my eyes, and I said, well, I think you're going to have problems with the plaster. Well, the stone house sitting empty, moisture, plaster and lath comes away from the walls, and do you want to spend a fortune restoring it, or do you want to take it out? Well, she started preparing the painting, and like pieces this big fell off the walls. Well, then then we started removing some of the stuff, and then behind we found a squirrel. Totally there, but just absolutely dehydrated. Must have got stuck. Must have smelled good for a while. But I mean, the simple job of just painting the room to make it look nice, I mean, you end up with a gutted room, and we've just decided in that room there's no way you can save it. But because of that, I was looking at I always felt there was something wrong with the ceilings because they were too perfect and they didn't look right, when you went from room to room. Well, they had removed some floorboards to put lighting in. So, and those floorboards were like a little bit lower than the floor, so I was going to correct that. So I took them out. I said, well, I'm going to get one of my halogen lights. So I got it in there with a mirror, and I was looking around to see if somebody left an artifact in the floor, between the floor and the ceiling. I'm looking, and I see this little molding going around. Here there was a dental molding going around, and they dropped the floor, and it's still there underneath, type of thing.
So you have many, many, many challenges, Larry.
And I didn't mean to take so much
Well,
time, but
I think
this
if
is
they
near
want
and
to
dear
talk
to
to
me.
you informally, they may, but thank you very much.
Yes,
And
thank
Nancy, thank you,
Oh.
because you're, what you started with precipitated
That's
all
good,
of
that's
this.
great.
This is the history of the land.
That's
Well,
right.
the other thing is, like the Oshkosh Northwestern, and I assume the Fond du Lac Reporter kind of compete to get Rip in business.
Yeah.
We have never, ever, ever, since 1990, received a complimentary Fond du Lac Reporter to take a look at it. The copy we got had this article in there, and I'm a newspaperaholic, and I was just reading through there, and I go like, oh, descendants of the Horner House still living in the residence. And I said, wait a minute here. But and Bruce was nice enough. I did know this was coming, and I almost got late coming here, but Bruce did leave me a message, which I
Good.
appreciate.
Oh.
Good. Well, thank you very much, and I really think you should belong to the Ripon Historical Society
Well,
as a resource.
get me a membership application. Bruce tried to talk me on to
We
getting
don't have
involved in
such
the
a
board.
thing. You just, if you and your wife want to belong, it's $8, and if you want to belong alone, it's $5.
Well, you gotta give me something to send a check to.
Well, Janet Crook isn't here, but she works at the M&I Bank, and
Well,
the
you know-
treasurer is Janet Crook.
Well, we both work in Oshkosh.
Yes.
We live in Ripon, and we have very little contact. You give me something to where I can send a check.
Oh, I can do
We will
that.
try.
I can do that.
They won't have an easier time recruiting you than
What I'll do is send you our stationery and put her, I'll mail it to you.
And George, I've been wanting to meet, we've gone in spurts where we've done research into the territorial minutes and stuff like that. And you're somebody I've been wanting to meet for a long time, and we said, well, one of these days we're going to get over there and meet you. twist his arm.
Yeah. That pity.
Same birthday?